Uh, yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm pretty sure all of y'all have had a long and tiring day at the conference. So I'm going to try and keep this talk as lively as I possibly can. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how India's institutions, specifically the educational institutions, can actually help shape Ethereum. And some background and context on how this talk came about. So we were brainstorming ideas on, okay, like how can we effectively leverage DevCon coming to India as a way to really spotlight and really shine some focus on the extensive research ecosystem that exists already in India today. And so essentially this talk is going to focus a lot on how we can connect this vast and deep research network to some of the key problems of this arguably the most important open digital infrastructure project that we're building. So to start off, maybe I would like to talk a little bit about how Ethereum is right now at what I'd like to call like an inflection point. So the protocol's open research problems span across a wide range of disciplines, right? So cryptographers are working on things like post-quantum, zero-knowledge proofs, data availability sampling, and these like super important aspects for the scaling roadmap. People from like the economics fields and the business schools and finance folks are working a lot on fee markets, on defining externalities through MEV and staking incentive models and so on. And more importantly, law and governance schools are just now starting to like ask very important questions around, okay, like what is the liabilities of DAOs, or the legal structures that can build around it, around like cross border digital payment transactions and so on. And so Ethereum is this very unique case where it is where it can take the inputs of not just one discipline or like one way of looking at it, but it's very, very cross-disciplinary with multiple scholars looking at it from different angles. Yeah, so a very interesting mental model that I have is this parable of the blind man and the elephant. So like it's like each person is looking at it from a different lens. So computer scientist A is saying that, hey, this is a test bed for like the cryptographic functions that I build. It's like a computer scientist B is saying it's a distributed system, it's a peer-to-peer network. For a finance scholar, it's this new financial system that's being built from scratch. Anthropologists are starting to look at it as like like subcultures and the people that are coordinating around this digital infrastructure. UX designers sees that they have tons of work ahead of them if they were actually going to like shape the protocol into something that's a little more usable and so on. So each of these people are right in what they say, but like none of this is a complete picture. And if we like zoom out and we look at it, like we see that the relevance of this is across many domains and many disciplines, and then each and every lens of looking at it here is arguably the right lens, but just incomplete. I think this is where India becomes extremely relevant. So I was trying to put some statistics together to really nail down for this talk what the state of education in India is and what the state of like higher education specifically is. And I was quite blown away with some of these numbers, right? So we see that India has 2.55 million STEM graduates per year. And this is the second globally after China. And this, in fact, makes up 31.7% of all global STEM graduates. There are 1,000+ research institutions in India which are publishing active academic work in various sort of venues and forums. Sorry. Yeah, but at the same time, there's this very interesting constraint that despite all of this, there's only like 260 researchers per million population, which is a constraint, but also a big opportunity if we actually look at it. And you may ask, like, why is academia even important? Like, we've all studied in university, we've all listened to our professors, but like, how much of an influence does that actually have in the real world? So people, often have this question of like how far like academia can be from actual realities in the world. And I would like to challenge that belief and that thought, because the truth is when academia actually engages, the Ethereum core protocol changes. And this is a fact. So if you look at the fee market that we have right now on Ethereum, EIP 1459, most of the formal economic analysis came from academia and like notably from like Tim Roughgarden from Columbia, and he's directly shaped how we think about the fee structure and the fee market structure in Ethereum. If you look at like the foundations of most of the ZK proofs that secures nearly billions of dollars in like layer 2s and also the core layer 1, a lot of these primitives and almost all of these primitives has come out of academic cryptography work from institutions like ETH at Zurich, MIT, and Stanford. And India is still pretty big on the game, because if you look at like smart contract vulnerability research, a lot of the formal analysis, a lot of the EVM bytecode analysis, which has directly led to new auditing and tooling standards, has come from institutions like IITs and NITs. And the list just goes on and on, right? So if you look at like formal verification and the consensus mechanism that we have today, again, it has its root back to academia. Virtual machine design has drawn out of years and years of bytecode and like compiler theory and stack-based architecture research. And the very idea of MEV, which becomes a very important theme in most of the conferences that we go to, like that whole concept of what MEV actually is, and like thinking about the market microstructure actually came out of a PhD student's work. And they were the very first ones to even define what MEV is. And so these are just examples of how various disciplines and various like people in academia have changed the protocol. And this also shows that a lot of the infrastructure that India currently has can directly contribute to like all these examples that have been mentioned before. So we have like engineering and computer science school that actively look at like cryptography algorithms and formal methods that can directly be applied to the tech stack. We have a lot of like theoretical computer science institutes like TIFR, CMI, IMSC, and so on, who literally look at like the type of like ZK research that we need to refocus and redirect towards the core protocol, and also like all the layer 2s and all the applications that are built on top of it. We have tons of institutes looking at like financial economics, mechanism design, game theory, and so on. We have a vast ecosystem of law schools that can look at the legality aspects of digital assets. We have the IAMs and ISBs who do a lot of work on organizational governance and institutional design, for which there's tons of problems that exist. Because if these problems didn't exist, then Ethereum would probably not be where it is today. And there's also like a lot of like social science and civil society schools in institutes like TISS here in Mumbai, Azim Premji University, and so on, that can start looking at the digital right aspect, the public good accountability research, and so on. And so this is just an example of like how India is vast, and India has the potential to directly shape many of the ways that we think about Ethereum today as an ecosystem as a whole. So that's kind of where my team, the Ethereum Foundation, comes in, the Academic Secretariat. So the Academic Secretariat is a research program within the Ethereum Foundation that primarily looks at like three things. The first one is like researcher and faculty engagement, where we try to like identify some of the best minds around the world, present to them the concept of Ethereum and some of the open problems that we can get them to weigh in on. We produce artifacts such as papers, course materials, reading lists, and so on. And the goal is to keep these artifacts last longer than any market cycles that we have, and actually help produce talent that Ethereum needs even in the future generations. And we try to have a much stronger institutional presence and legitimacy in areas, in venues, and in circles that are outside this nice little bubble and community that we've created for ourselves here in Ethereum land. So actually hosting workshops at universities, at research institutions, supporting scholars at global venue, with the singular goal of like making Ethereum a serious research object. So it's important to say here that like India already has a very significant Ethereum ecosystem, and everything that the research layer does is just additive rather than anything else. So we already have a very high builder density. We are one of the few places that have as active Web3 policy engagement, where Indian regulators and civil societies have engaged with crypto frameworks compared to most economies that we have. There's a lot of like entrepreneurial output, like some of the most ambitious projects in the space have their roots traced back to Indian origin founders. And we have, a very vast diaspora at the frontier, which are like embedded across the core protocol teams and the core research teams in the ecosystem working on cutting edge problems. And what this research layer does is basically to move from this model of participating in the ecosystem, building on top of the ecosystem, to actually help shaping it and have, for example, like influence into the protocol. So like independent Indian researchers publishing on economics design consensus can actually directly inform how the protocol can evolve in the future. It creates legitimacy in global debates. So having like Indian scholars present in governance discussions can really carry weight because of all the legitimacy and institutional prestige that academia brings, which cannot normally be easily replicable by most other profiles. It creates durable knowledge assets, which is by far the most important thing. Things like course syllabi papers, research programs that, again, like outlast any sort of like market cycle. And it also adds a lot of depth and not just speed. I think India has done a pretty good job at being fast. And this creates like a lot of depth in the work that we do as well. So a lot of you must already be from the ecosystem. So here are some ways that you can actually engage with academia in a way that's meaningful for them. So the first way is to like actually take your real problems, your real data, and your real stakes, which is exactly what academic researchers need to publish serious work, and open it up to researchers to weigh in and sort of like work with you on. You can, if you're a DAO or a foundation, fund independent research work that can add that critical inquiry that you need, and to give that like perspective that probably internally like you might not already have, by funding more work and encouraging more neutral research and scholarly input. As investors and VCs, then we can really encourage you to like back the next generation of people who will shape Ethereum's governance, long-term trajectory and regulatory landscape. And finally, I'd like to end off by saying that you could talk to us anytime. Feel free to reach out. Here are like my handles. And one specific program that we are currently running that I would encourage all of you to take note of and also spread awareness around your researcher circles is that we are running a PhD fellowship program with a 24,000 stipend over a 1-year period. We expect to onboard somewhere around 9 to 10 fellows, and applications close very soon in 3 weeks on April 1st. And so, yeah, we encourage all of you to apply. That's it. Thank you very much.